let's see if this thing works. Alright, so I am finally cutting a video, sort of. This is basically just going to be audio recording of me. It's just going to be basically about my path and where I'm at with the baby steps. So, okay. So, about me. I am baby step 4, 5, and 6. I started my path back in September 2016. The reason for my why was, I really wanted to get out of debt. Before September 2016, I, basically was doing a budget. I've heard of Dave Ramsey's name way back, I want to say in 2012. I basically did like a Google search, and the premise was, how to budget and but basically with percentages. So if you look up Dave Ramsey and starter percentages, you'll see basically some guidelines of how to go about, budgeting your money. For example, actually I can pull it up right now. Dave Ramsey starter percentages. And the basic premise was you could get, here we go. So he says here, housing should be 25% of your budget. That is what he does recommend on the show. Although I've seen some where it's like 25 to 35%. One of the other ones I pulled up actually had ranges, and here's some ranges in here. So I'll just read from here. It says 10% giving, 10% saving, 10 to 15% of food, utilities 5 to 10%, housing 25%, transportation 10%, health 5 to 10%, insurance 10 to 25%, recreation 5 to 10%, personal spending 5 to 10%, and miscellaneous 5 to 10%. Now, one of the reasons why I did this was I was kind of had an overabundance of money, or an overabundance of money to what I was used to. About myself, I work in the military. At this time, I'm getting up to the point where I've almost served 20 years in September. So back in 2012, when I found Dave Ramsey's name, I had an income from the military, and my wife was actually working, and she is prior military. She was working as a supply clerk, or actually assistant manager, and so she brought in an income. So per paycheck, I think we were getting about $5,000 a month. So again, that was better than my one income of, I think I was pulling in 2,500, after paying everything, something to that effect. So, and actually before that, my wife again was in the military, but our situation went down to one income as my wife left the military. She gave birth to our first son, and just going down to one income was scary. And there was basically nothing I could do about it, because the way that the military had us, it was, we were separated by 3 hours apart, and we were living in Germany at the time. So fast forward, we're living in Korea, and she's working on the Air Force Base there. I'm working on the Air Force Base there. We're pulling in this money, and what started to be a 2-year tour ended up being a 3-year tour. And halfway, within this 3-year tour, we're like finally getting on a good run. Like, we're coming to some money, and it's like good. What to do now? Because what I was doing was foolish. I was going to work, and I would stop by our post exchange, just before I started a shift, especially during a night shift. And I would go get, whatever I thought was interesting that would, keep me awake or keep me sane. A lot of energy drinks, magazines, um, just anything. There's just kind of like a buyer's uh, compulsion in a way. So I was like, I finally was starting to look it up, and I was like, what am I going to do? What should I be doing right now? And between me looking it up and talking to another guy, he was like, hey, you should be doing some investing. And even within this starter percentages right here, it doesn't say anything about investing. Other than saving. When I look at saving, think of hey, put in your saving account, and that would be your rainy day account, but it wouldn't be like your investment using an investment account. So I just thought of that just now. So, but this first part of the starter percentages was like, okay, I can start doing this, and actually, instead of just throwing money at things that I wanted to get, let's intentionally spend money on the things that we want to do, especially like recreation. So fast forward into 2013, I went from two incomes to one income again, and we're renting a house. This time we're in Oklahoma, and I'm just trying to adjust to everything, but I actually had things written down and some money set aside so that it felt like we there was some margin between doing the things we um, have to do between the things that we want to do. Now, because I looked up Dave Ramsey's name and just did these starter percentages, I didn't really know what Dave Ramsey was about. Dave Ramsey was about clearing up the debt, cutting up the credit cards, and never going back into debt again. So the credit cards I had a USAA card, which is very common for service members. If they don't have USAA, they probably have Navy Credit Federal Union, or maybe when I first came in the military, I had like the Fort Sill Credit Union bank account. So that was what I started out with until I shifted over to USAA, and it was definitely a game changer for me because in order to do things with Fort Sill Credit Union, you'd have to call. USAA is more online and more accessible. So so I had that USAA credit card. I ended up having a balance of $3,700, and then I also had a Star card, which is also common in the military. Wow. The military Star card, and I basically got up to a limit of $8,700 by the time, what was it, 2015 by the time I got that. So we're talking about, if I had maxed everything at that point, we're talking about 12,400 worth of debt. So, um, so I never really thought about it that much. At that time, I was paying, whatever the minimum payments were, or however I want, however well I wanted to do on it. Um, and and at one point, I had paid off my smallest credit card of $3,700, or either I paid it off or I got pretty close. And then I kept it around, and then when I kept it around, I started taking from that. I was like, well, I'm not at the end of the month yet, I'll just use the credit card. And then that's how I eventually fell back into debt. So one more thing that as part of my debt journey was in 2015, I ended up going to South Carolina, where I'm from. The conversation before that was a a lot of the hotels that are on the military base belong to this company called IHG. You may know of some hotels like Holiday Inn or Candlewood Suites. So, so the military sometimes has us go on temporary duty or some trips, some like business trips, and a lot of the hotels on the base belong to IHG, Intercontinental Housing Group, whatever it's called. So basically, I don't believe I started an account, but basically I had like a number with them, and basically they're like, hey, if you uh, give us our reward number every time you check in, you'll get some points off of it, and then eventually you'll get a free stay or whatever it is. And some of these trips that I were taking to go to different places were 2 weeks long or 3 weeks long. So it's like, hey, why not? I do all this for work. Why not get a free night? When I'm not, when I do want it for my family or whatnot. So they eventually called me about if I wanted to stay um, with them, but this ended up being a timeshare deal. But they got me all hooked on like, oh, you can stay in Vegas, you can stay in, but I don't even know where, probably like New Jersey or something. But Myrtle Beach came up, and I was like, if I go to Myrtle Beach, it won't be too far from my father who lives in Columbia, South Carolina. Why not, take this trip? And it only costs $99. So you think. Then they like call you back and they're like, oh, you need this to the booking fee and this sort of fee and blah blah blah. And then at the end of 3 days or 4 days, you need to come watch our presentation. You don't need to buy anything, and then after the presentation, you can go about your way. But that leads you, of course, down to the timeshare route, which I ended up getting in their little pitch, and they're like, you want to be an owner, you don't want to be a buyer, you want to be an owner, and that sort of thing. So they get you into that program where, they get you down to like, well, how much do you think you can give to us a month? And then they started off like with a crazy value of like $1,000 per month. I'm like, whoa, 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 no, no, no. And then they were like, well, what can you do? Well, 10% of my budget was like $300, and then they're like, okay, we can get you down to 270. I think it was around $275 per month is what I was paying, but it's for this loan for 10 years. I don't know what the percentage rate on it was, and but to look at the value of that, it was like $15,000 altogether, just to get, and they give you 96,000 points per year, which gets you into some places for a week, but sometimes you have to pay more than that in points, which means you gotta pay more in dollars to stay at some of these other resorts. So so that happened, and so the value of that, which I was saying was about $15,000. The value of the credit cards that I had was about, and they weren't maxed yet, but there was about 12,400, like I said. And then we had some other things going on, which I'll talk about. So in 2016, I'm actively listening to the Dave Ramsey show. I'm like, how are we gonna do this? And I'm playing it on the car, playing it in the car, off my phone, and playing it everywhere I go. And I'm like, I really, really want to do this. Like, as soon as I did the timeshare deal, I was like, I knew that I didn't want it. I was already doing well on my own. We were, again, I would set aside 10% of our income toward, recreation, which 10% at that time was like $300 to like do things. And what we were doing was going from Oklahoma down to and driving down to Dallas, watching some of the soccer games. There was a pizza place that we liked down there. So the drive killed some time. Watching soccer was something for me to connect to my wife, because she more likes international soccer, because she loved the times that we were like sitting in the stadium and watching these games, and how much I was getting into it, and you know the involvement in it, and trying to get our son to get into soccer, which we actually did while we were in Oklahoma. So those type of things, but I already given practically my 10% of that recreation went to the timeshare after that. Plus, I think on that trip we ended up having our getting pregnant and on our way to our second child. So our second child was on the way. So I mean, it was kind of painful giving up some of our recreation money, but we weren't doing much of anything because we were getting ready for our second child. We were, I'm sure we had some kid clothing, some kid toys from our first son, even though there's a 7-year difference between the two children, and but still, it's just something that we could have done on our own, and I kind of got forced into doing it, and then my inability to say no is what really capped it off. So going into 2016, I got an offer to 2016 is the time. It's 3 years from when I arrived to Oklahoma. So normally every 3 years you have to have a what we call a permanent change of station. So unless you got an extension of some sort, you were moving around from one duty station to the next. So for my career assignment, I was like, hey, can I do this sensor management gig? It will be good for my career. So I was, interested. I contacted my career manager, and then, but the the main thing was, getting more money some way somehow, and then also in the middle of the PCS, I found out that my wife could go to New York, and her father, my father-in-law, said, hey, you've been, gone away from the military so long, when are we going to see our daughter and everything like that. So I also found out that it may be a good way for them to reconnect. But this job would require me to go overseas into a Middle Eastern country for a period of 12 months. And at that time, the Army was saying that Rosie, she could live anywhere she wanted to. And I was like, okay. She could, take we could redirect our living situation so that we could live out of New York City. The Army will pay the housing allowance for us to live in New York City. But, when we find a place, let's try to live, as, lower to our means as we can, so that, we still get the housing allowance per month, which at the time was $3,600. So let's rent a place for, I tried to get one for $2,200 and that fell through. So we ended up getting a place for about $2,600 a month. So $1,000 difference was instantly added to our income, based on that fact. So we did that move, but I was like extremely poor at the time in doing that. So and I also had to go to school for 6 weeks on top of on top of the 1 year. So we did everything. Fast forward, they're in New York in an apartment. They're not too far. They're probably they'd probably the easiest way to like get between her and her family is a train ride. Tried to find some place, you know, right down the street or something, but the area isn't quite that great. So we just did what we could, and so we did that, and then I was overseas serving, um, and that's one way we increased our income. Number one, when I go overseas, I get basically the taxes that I pay become tax free, so I earn some money in that regards. Um, um, so I was doing that. I was getting the New York housing allowance, and then my wife, because she had served, she had access to the Montgomery GI Bill, and she had been using the Montgomery GI Bill, but she had a year left on it, or 2 year. She had 2 years left, something like that, on it to use. So what the Montgomery GI Bill allowance allowed us to do was she would receive at the E5 rate, or the it was a sergeant, a buck sergeant in our army rank structure. He would receive the E5, I believe, dependent rate or single rate, something like that. And if she were to take college while she was there, and she was trying to finish her supply chain management degree, she couldn't quite do the supply chain management. She went to Queens College, and she was working on some sort of management path. So because she was doing that, she again that was 30 about 36 $3,500 more added to our income. So um, so we were just making money, and within 18 months, well, first within 6 months from the time I started serving over there in October 2016. Uh, Correction, it was about 8 months. So from the time I started working there, October 2016, and I got my first paycheck, to April 1st, we were pretty much baby step two done. Actually, we were done on April 1st. Like we got to March 1st, and I think I had $400 to pay, but I just something like that. It was something silly, like $500 more to pay. But I had paid a lot from income taxes, received the income taxes, and just started chucking the money away. And I just had like another $500 left, and I just couldn't pull anywhere because I put like $5,000 on the debt at that time, something like that. I'll have to make a video maybe on how how it went down, because I still have the thing on Google Sheets. So again, April 1st we were done, and then started working on baby step three, and so um, so again, like, I had to serve overseas for a period of like 12 months. And then they also was looking for people to extend. I was like, if I extend, in our current situation, there's 6 months more money that we can put toward our goals. And so basically that's what I did. I signed up for an extension. I had also got promoted 3 months later, and actually 2 months later. And things were just looking a lot better for us. So after all that, it's March 2018, and I get to leave overseas. I get to the States. Um, I've got over $40,000 in the bank, ready to make some moves. Because from there, like, we don't own a house. All the housing that we've stayed in has been, government housing. Before that it was barracks. At one point, I lived in an apartment because the army was like, hey, the living standards weren't right in the barracks, so we'll allow you to live off post, and you're married, so that lasted about 6 months for me. But after 2018, I was pretty much in a mode where I could be baby step 4, 5, and 6. So, and that's what I did. And everything, I mean, everything is working a lot better than what it was. I mean, it's, um, so, with the timeshare, we're still signed up for that. We didn't, oh, oh, that's another thing I gotta make a video on. Timeshare exit team. In short, don't like them. But right now I'm kind of in the place where I don't know what to do with them. But anyway, we still have the timeshare, but the amount that we had to pay monthly is what I wiped out as part of Baby Step 2. It was kind of one of those things I didn't think of until the very end. But then again, it was the biggest amount the biggest loan that I had to pay. And fortunately, when we did our income tax and we had a high income tax refund, we were able to pay that off very quickly. So that was very good for us. So I still deal with that. So after I served overseas, I ended up coming to where I live now. I live in Texas, and so my goal was to be a homeowner. Now, a suggestion by Dave Ramsey was, if you are gonna just jump from place to place, do not buy a house. Just rent. But my goal, which is coming into play right now, is to stay here as long as possible. And one of my thoughts on it was, if I can just transfer from the job I have now to another unit that is here, I can serve 3 more years here in this city and pay down on the same house. That's my goal. Another option that I have is, I did 3, I'll be coming up on 3 years. Then I would put myself up for another hardship tour, which would be a year long. Then come back to, the city here, and that will allow me to pay another extra year. So 3 years here, 1 year hardship tour, come back here for another 3-year tour, and then basically evaluate from there and go from there. But it would put me in a place where I've lived here for the past 7 years, and that way, that's more to put toward the mortgage, especially 4, 5, and 6, putting extra down on the mortgage. So that's where I'm trying to go with that. So I mean, now as we're recording this, we're dealing with COVID-19 and staying in, especially with my job. Well, I can't say it for every soldier that's going on, especially, I'm going to have to go in next week and do some things. But the job that I'm working at right now has allowed me to telework. So basically, I've got a good, stable job. I have a great family. These guys, I have a wife and 2 boys. I get to hug them and see them every day. Love them to death, even though sometimes they drive me crazy. But for the most part, my life is good. The thing that killed me right now is just the uncertainty of where I'm gonna be, um, where am I gonna be assigned to in the army, and then one of my other uncertainties, which right now we're doing good right now, but right now again as of September I would have served 20 years in the military at the end of September. So there were times I was just like, I don't know if I'm going to even get to that point where I can say I can have an army retirement. Now the thing with the army retirement is you get 25% of your base pay. So it's looking like I were to if I were to retire right at September, which I'm not, but if I were, I would get a check from the army for $2,300, and that's before tax. So after tax, that's $2,000, and then it may be lower than that. So to just look at that and like, there's no way I can support my family for just $2,000. Of course, I would have to work another job and see what else I would have to do. So the things that I'm looking, right now I have an associate's degree just in general studies. My wife just finished her bachelor's. So if I had to retire soon, I would have to really get in gear. I would look to use my Montgomery GI Bill to get myself a bachelor's and see if I can, find a good degree path, job qualification that'll help me get something good down the road. Get my wife employed, increase our income that way, and look at all those sort of things. So, so those are the things that I'm looking at. Again, that's kind of like my baby step journey. Again, way back when, I don't know why, but we just didn't know what our end state goals of our money should be like and do. And then when everything like came to a head, we just had our I had it moment, and that was in 2015 with a baby on the way. Found a way to increase our income for a while, and that was my deployment to overseas. Once I got through with that, we were basically in the place to be baby step 4, 5, 6, and here we are. And we try to do, we're still able to buy, some things that we like, but again, everything's about, saving for our future and getting our place into, we need to get to retirement, and the army retirement by itself isn't going to do it. Just like Dave Ramsey says, the best way to produce is through your income. So, so we are still trying to do that, and maximize our IRAs, continue my army career, which will produce more money if I can stay up to 30 years and get promoted and do those things. And so basically everything relies on those things of job improvement. Getting past COVID-19 would be nice. And again, just maximizing our income to produce a good retirement. That's just the best way to do it. So I just want to put a video out there. Hopefully someone listens, and hopefully I'll do more content in the near future, breaking down. I definitely want to do a video about our budget, definitely want to do a video about some just some other topics that are out there, and get this channel up and running, and definitely looking for feedback, and hopefully looking to provide feedback. So if you see me in the comments commenting, there's a story behind it. We're baby step 4, 5, and 6. We're trying to provide our knowledge to everybody, keep everybody motivated, um, find different tactics for ourselves, and I guess the main point of the channel is to support everybody, and hopefully everybody can provide their support to others. So with that, thank you for listening. Give it a like, give it a subscribe. Hopefully hit that notification bell and look out for new videos that I push out. Until next time, thank you very much.